Hello, hope you're having a great day. Rob Mayzes here from Musician on a Mission, and this video is going to be all about the latest updates to Logic Pro 10. And in particular, we're going to be focusing mostly on 10.4. Since then, 10.4.1 has come out, but it's mostly just bug fixes. So we're going to be going through all the awesome features that came with 10.4. So here's a quick list before we dive into this of some of my favorite features and the highlights of this update. So we've got vintage EQ plugins, a whole new suite of EQ plugins. We've got ChromaVerb, which is a new algorithmic room reverb. We've got a smart tempo feature called Adapt Tempo, which is incredible. We've got 3 new instruments, studio horns, studio strings, and the vintage Mellotron. We've got some updates to Space Designer, 2 new effects called Phat FX and Step FX. We've got a direction mixer, 800 new loops, 2 new drummers. We can now undo mixer changes. You have to turn this on in your history window, but this is a great feature. You can bounce to 32-bit float. It now supports ARA for Melodyne. There's some updates to Alchemy and a bunch of other stuff. And then 10.4.1 was just a few bug fixes. So I'm not going to go through all of these, otherwise this video would be very long, but I'm going to share some of my favorites with you, and we're going to start with the vintage EQ plugins. So I've got a track here. Have a quick listen. Kind of a prog rock vibe about it, crossover between like guitar based jazz and prog rock. Couple of references just to kind of tune your ears in. And then back to Almix. So this is by an artist called Janel. I highly recommend you go and check him out. And straight away, something I'm hearing here is the drums, the cymbals are lacking a bit of top end. This is something that I want to do at this point in the mix. And instead of reaching for just a channel EQ, let's try one of these new vintage EQs. So I'm going to go to here, EQ, vintage EQ collection, and we've got 3 in total. The vintage console EQ. We've then got the vintage graphic EQ. And finally, last but not least, we've got the vintage tube EQ, which is my favorite. Now, before we dive into these plugins, I just want to tell you that I put together a free Logic cheat sheet so that you can actually get to know these plugins, because there's so many now. There's so many different EQs and compressors. So I put together a PDF that takes you through all of those and gives you some tips and tricks so that you can use them more efficiently. Just go to musicianonamission.com/logic to get that free PDF. So let me just talk you through each of these. So the console EQ, that's stereotypical, semi-parametric. It's going to sound a bit better for adding boosts. Surgical stuff, still better to use that channel EQ, but when you want to boost the top end or maybe boost the upper mids to bring out presence, that's where this is going to excel. And also I like these style of EQs because you don't have as much to mix with your eyes with. You don't have a big frequency spectrum here and an analyzer. You have to use your ears, and that's why I love this style of EQ. We didn't have one like this before, or at least a good one before in Logic, so this is a great feature. And then the graphic EQ, probably not going to use that much. This is more for live use. I never use graphic EQs personally when I'm mixing. If you use them, nothing wrong with that, and you should definitely check that out, but I haven't actually used that yet. And then my favorite is this new tube EQ, and this is 2 different models. The top one here is great for working with the low end and the top end. These are more like shelves. And then this mid one here is great for working with the mid range. If you've never used a Pultec style EQ before, then let me just talk through how this works. You choose the frequency, and sometimes it's a bit confusing what relates to what, but this is our kind of low frequency spectrum on this first one. And this is the frequency, this is then the attenuation and the boost. Now, what's cool about Pultec style EQs is we can boost and attenuate, and it creates this weird effect where we can add lots of low end and then start to attenuate as well to clean up around it in kind of layman's term. That's not exactly what's going on, but that's how I like to think of it. So let's solo the drum group and just listen to how this works. So we can boost the low end, and it's going to start to really sound over the top and too much, but then we can bring up the attenuation and we're going to have more low end in there, but also it's going to sound clean as well. So it's way over the top there, but it's this strange relationship between a boost and an attenuation. That's what takes getting used to with this style of EQ. Now, I love using it for top end stuff, and I tend to use this quite often when I want to add a bit more shimmer, a bit more shine or silkiness to something, and that's what we're focusing on here with this drum kit. So I'm going to dial in this higher boost, play around with the frequency. I know it's probably going to be quite high if we want to add top end to the cymbal. It's probably going to be 10k around there somewhere, and I like to keep this nice and wide so it sounds a bit more musical by turning up that bandwidth. We're going to play with this boost, and then I'm going to come back to the high attenuation in a second. So really focus on the cymbals, and you can hear that top end coming in. Now it's starting to sound a bit brittle. Those cymbals, they have a bit more energy in that top end now, but they are starting to sound a bit harsh, a bit too much. And this is where the attenuation comes in. So we can boost it around 10k, and we can play around with this a bit more. But then you can also attenuate at 20k, and that's going to have an impact much lower than 20k. You might be thinking, well, 20k, isn't that the human range of hearing? Well, it is, but by attenuating at 20k, it's also going to have an impact on frequencies below that. So just listen to how, as we bring this up, we still have this kind of silkiness that's coming from, or I'd say this is more kind of excitement than silkiness. And then we're starting to get rid of some of that harshness and that brittleness by attenuating as well. I'm just going to solo for this so you can really hear what's going on. So focus on the cymbals in particular. So now we have that balance where we can boost some of that top end and that energy around 10k, but then start kind of taping it off nearer as we get kind of up to 1460k by using this attenuator control. So there's more to this EQ. Once you start using it, you start to realize how cool it is. We can change the output mode to get some different sounds. Can decide if we want to drive that output model more as well. Pretty cool. And then we can start to play around with the mid frequencies as well. Maybe we want to add some low end warmth here, and then we want to dip some of that muddiness, and then maybe we want to add some more top end but lower down this time. So it's pretty over the top, but it gives you a sense of how this sounds. So spent quite a lot of time in this video already because I really love this plugin and Pultec style EQs in general. I still prefer the Waves emulation in terms of how it sounds. And I know there are even better emulations out there as well. I've just always used the Wave one. But the fact that you even have a Pultec emulation in Logic now, I think is incredible. And as far as I'm aware, there aren't many DAWs that have these style of EQs available, especially not just in a free update like this. So we could also play around with this console EQ, and this is going to be more straightforward. I'm not going to spend too long on this here because it's just like a normal EQ. You've got the gain, you've got the frequency, and then we've got a low cut and a high shelf as well. And again, we've got different output models. We can play with natural or linear phase. If you're using this on the mix bus and you want it to be a bit more transparent, you can use linear phase. So I'm just going to play around with this a bit now just so you can get a feel for how it sounds. So pretty cool. I recommend you use this, especially if you're still learning EQ, because it forces you to mix with your ears more so and really just dial it in to what you think sounds good rather than relying on how it looks. Because sometimes if you need like a 10 dB boost to get the sound you want, then by all means do it. When you're doing that on the channel EQ, it looks a bit scary, whereas here it's fine. It looks pretty normal. It's just a control. So that's it for EQ. Let's talk about one of my other favorite additions, and this is the new reverb. So I've already got a reverb bus going on here. So that's my short reverb, and then I've got a room reverb. Right now for this, I'm using ChromaVerb, which has been available in Logic for a while. But the new reverb that I want to play with is ChromaVerb. And this is an algorithmic room reverb. We've got a bit more control than with ChromaVerb and some great presets too. So I'm just going to scroll through a few of these now so you can hear how they sound. And then we've got chamber, concert, much bigger room, theatre, synthal, quite like that one, smooth space. Oh, that's funky. That sounds nice too. And let's try smooth space again. So those two are quite similar. Let's see if we can dial that in. So just adjusting the decay time so it kind of sits in the mix, and then we can play around with the size and the density a bit, and if we want we can add some EQ. And this is really cool because now we don't need to do this in a separate plugin. We've got the full channel EQ here, which is great because how we make the reverb sound tonally is going to have a big impact on the mix, especially if it's just a room reverb like this one, because I wanted this track to sound really cohesive and a bit live. It's that kind of genre. So if I want to make the whole track sound brighter, I can just bring up the top end on the reverb. It's going to make the whole track sound brighter. If there's an issue with muddiness, I can fix that by reducing with this low cut here. So let's play around with that a bit. Getting quite a lot of muddiness and boominess around this lower mid-range kind of upper bass area, so I'm going to try reducing that a bit as well. can really hear that. It's that droning guitar that's adding quite a lot of muddiness there and just bringing that EQ in. It's just so easy, the workflow here. We can even, in this details page, start to play with the early late reflection. So that's sounding pretty good. Now let's try and set the level of that reverb in the mix. So with this track, I don't want to go over the top with the reverb. I feel like it's sitting really nicely there, just bringing it up till you notice it and then kind of leaving it at that spot or backing it off a bit. And listen to this, when I mute it, suddenly you'll notice it just kind of sounds a bit empty. And then when I bring that reverb back in, it's not a massive noticeable reverb, it's just kind of glues the tracks together and makes it sound a bit more natural and cohesive. And there we go. That sounds great. I really like this reverb. I normally use Valhalla Room or FabFilter Pro R, but this sounds awesome. It's really fun to work with, really easy to work with. So that's another one of my favorite features. Okay, of course, there are still loads more cool features that I want to quickly talk to you about. And one of the best ones is we now have this adapt project tempo. And what this means is if you want to play in an audio part, for example, a guitar part, and you've got loads of MIDI elements, maybe it's Easy Drummer or even just the built-in Logic drummer and some MIDI keys, that kind of stuff, you can play in a guitar part, leave it on adapt project tempo, and it will figure out the tempo that you're playing at. And if you fluctuate in your tempo slightly, so you go a bit faster in the chorus, a bit slower somewhere else, it's going to adapt all of the other instruments to you. So that's a really cool feature, especially if you use lots of MIDI elements and you want to make it feel a bit more natural. So you can play in the guitar part, for example, or the bass part without having to record to a click, and then the whole project will follow you, which is very cool. So now let's just quickly run through some of the remaining features. There's some great new virtual instruments, including some updates to Alchemy. There's a new Mellotron, which is really cool, really fun to use, and a new studio horns, and also a studio string. So I'm just going to play this. I just put this together just to kind of show you how some of these sound in conjunction with some vocal effects using Vocal Synth 2 from iZotope. There you go, you heard all of those. So we've got the Mellotron, which is very cool. We've got horns, and we can use sections or singles. And then we've got strings as well, and we can use an ensemble or singles. Really flexible, really cool. So as I said, loads of other updates, too many to fit into one video. So go download this update if you haven't already. I highly, highly recommend it. Loads of great additions, and I think you'll love it. Of course, now the problem is that there are about 5 different EQs in Logic alone. So I put together a free Logic plugin cheat sheet that takes you through the core plugins like EQ, all the EQ plugins, compression, the important stuff that you're going to be using over and over again. And in there, you'll just find some recommended approaches and tips and tricks for each of those plugins. So if you want to download that cheat sheet, it's completely free. Just go to musicianonamission.com/logic, enter your details there to download it right away. So that's all from me. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob from Musician on a Mission, and I'll see you next time.